Hello again. Christ, the Crucifixion, and the Cathars. Love 175. Sounds like a strange combination, but there's a vital connection between the three of them. In the previous video, 174, I was talking about the connection between the Essene message, the message of specifically the therapeutic Essenes, with Jesus Christ, Yeshua, the Nazarene, Mary Magdalene, Mary of Magdala. About they were Jewish heretics in that they believed in equality of the sexes. The Jewish traditional religions, even today, doesn't believe in that. Equality between male and female. They didn't believe in sacrificing animals, which the rest of the traditional Jewish followers did in the temple. And what made certainly the therapeutic scene was that they wanted to promote universal love for everybody, for all of humanity, which included animals. And that just set them apart from virtually the rest of the world, not just the Middle East or Europe, because everybody had slaves. The whole system depended upon it. And that will come into our talk a little bit later. So that was exactly the same message that the Cathars had in medieval and today's Catharism. And that's total equality. No one is above or below anybody else. You neither look up nor look down. You treat a waitress as a princess and a princess as a waitress. Or Jack is as good as, or Jack and Mary as good as their master and mistress, whatever. Total equality. They're trying to bring people together, liberate the mind. Very few rules. They didn't believe they weren't into marriage. People got married, that was fine, but they weren't into it. They thought it was a pretty terrible world, and they didn't want to bring children into such a terrible place at that time. They were miserable times, believe me, and they didn't believe in baptism and the sacraments and things like that. That set them apart from the Catholic Church. But the big thing was, which made them completely, again, different, was that their God was a loving God, whose love was unconditional, it wasn't conditional, whereas the God of the Jewish God of the Old Testament, he was a pretty wrathful God. He was into, even right at the beginning with Cain and Abel, he didn't like Cain's offering to him, which he got his fruit from the ground, and he actually ploughed the ground and gave the fruit. No, God wanted he was more happy with the killing of the firstborn of the lambs, which was offered to him by Abel. He thought that was a better sacrifice. So it starts off pretty bloody. So the Essenes were quite different to all this, and so were the Cathars. And later, of course, it was the Cathars that didn't believe in which separated them from mainstream Christianity, was the fact that the Cathars, the Templars, didn't believe that Jesus, Yeshua, Christ, was the Son of God. He was immortal like the rest of us. So that was the connection between the Essenes and where they were with the Essenes and then the Cathars then, and there's no difference today, basically. This total equality, male, female, no one's better or worse than anybody else. In a room, everyone's equal, whether you're prince or waiter, everyone, we have this total equality. There's no difference between male and female, so that just carries on. And I believe that's the way it should be. The other thing was that the crucifixion, the Cathars disdained the cross. They did not like the cross. They abhorred the cross. They thought the cross was an instrument of torture, and their argument was, why would you worship an instrument of torture? You know, if the person, the Saviour, was crucified on the cross, why on earth would you worship the cross? If there was a pistol that blew your father's brains out, would you worship that? If there's a rope that you strangled or garroted or hung someone, would you worship the rope? No, but for some reason or other, Christians worship the cross. So they thought that was absolutely abhorrent. They did not like that at all. And also, now with the archaeological finds that they've had, they found that that Jesus Christ most likely wasn't crucified on the cross that they have. There was the Romans had a number of crosses, which the one that they used most, and just called a crux simplex, and it was simply a pole in the ground, or tree, just a pole, a stump, anything, and it was just straight up and down, and they tied the person's hands or nailed it, but normally they tied it, and to the top of the tree, and so you tied up here and down and either side of the foot, you were nailed through the ankle bone, and on either side of the tree, and you just simply nail into the tree. So the archaeological finds, there's the one in Jerusalem, which is on show, and you'll see it here, and the nail goes through the heel bone. Now, the thing about this is that the nail is only 7 centimeters, 5.3 inches. So it's literally that big. So the thing was, it was literally just basically designed for 1 foot, and it certainly wasn't big enough for 2 feet. And so they noticed that with this one in Jerusalem, and they have the bone. They know the person's name. Johannan, he was in the grave, or the ossuary. Ossuary is a little box that once the person's decayed in the tomb, they gather the bones and they put that in a box termed an ossuary. But then later there was another one found in Italy in 2007, I think. And there, again, the nail just went through the heel bone, not through the front of the foot, which is always depicted in all the paintings of the crucifixion, all the medieval ones, and the early ones, and the traditional ones. And that also went through the heel bone. Now, then later, don't get me wrong, I'll put it up on the board, but I think it was 2016 in Cambridgeshire, in England, in the UK, they found a skeleton, and the complete skeleton in this case, and there was wounds where the nails had penetrated the heel bones of the skeleton. Both the heel bones had been penetrated, and there were holes and damage to that area, so they knew he'd been crucified. But there was no damage to the wrist bones. So they know from that the person was tied, and he wasn't and bound, so he wasn't nailed through the wrist to the top. So this is the archaeological finds. So we know now that we have the basically crux simplex, which is just a pole straight up and down, and the person is just simply bound at the top, and the feet either side is just nailed to the post. There's the one that's a cross with an X, decimator. It's named after the X, which is 10 for 10 in Latin in their numbers. So it's named after that crux decimator. And the other one was quite common, was a tau cross, which is simply just a cross, a T, like a T, and that was, I forget the actual name of that. That one, that was the three that the Romans used. The most common was the pole, just straight up and down. They could just use any old pole anywhere, and just the person was just tied up and nailed either side, and that was it, very quick. Or the X, which was also convenient. And there was another system that occasionally they were crucified upside down. So that's what we know from the crucifixions. But the Cathars really had a thing about, they did not like the cross. And the other thing they didn't like about the cross, it reminded them too much of a sword. And believe me, there was people with swords chasing them all the time. Another thing was that there was a tradition in the south of France, which I also spoke about previously, where the two Marys, or three Marys, Mary Salome, his sister, Mary of Magdala, his wife, and his mother, Mary, they came over in a boat with Joseph of Arimathea and others, and they landed in Saint Marie de la Mer in the Mediterranean port, not too far from Le Bon, on the Mediterranean, and they landed there. And then later, when he recovered from his wounds, because they did not believe he died on the cross, so there's now that's, I'm not saying all Cathars believe that, but that's certainly the later Cathars certainly that they took that on board, and so there's this cultural tradition, and that was there, and plus the influx from all the other traditions that came into the south of France, from the Moors that were there, from the Crusaders and so forth, and that all coalesced into modern Catharism. And then of course you had, that was already there, then you had people coming from Bogomil, from the Bogomils coming over, who brought help. They had some organisational skills that they then assisted with the Cathars, because they had very, very similar beliefs coming up from their area in Bulgaria and that area. So it all coalesced, and you had this medieval Catharism, which is Gnostic, and so being that, it meant it wasn't static. A Gnostic, what they call a Gnostic, is that you're seeking knowledge, you're seeking new knowledge, you're seeking what can science tell us, what can mysticism tell us, where can we get knowledge from, and we'll evaluate that knowledge, and we can use it, we'll use it. And so Catharism was unlike the mainstream Islam and Judaism and Christianity, which got you stuck in that period of time. Catharism grew. It was out to grow. It debated with the Jews and the Catholic, the priests and so forth, but they were out to learn and grow. Another thing that the Essenes and Josephus, I mentioned Flavius Josephus, who wrote the book, the Jewish Antiquities, and he said that the Essenes were very, very much into the mystical side of prophecy, which is a mystical side of religion, and he said they were so often right, and they'd also studied the stars, and so they're obviously into astrological signs as well. So they were, with medicine and science, the Therapeutae Essenes were, especially the Therapeutae, were up there with the latest knowledge. So they were also Gnostic, and because they were evolving. There were other Essene groups that were, for instance, in Qumran, where they stayed out and they were removed from the cities, and they were static, and they didn't believe in marriage. They just took children in, people like that, and they brought them into the orphans, children, and they just became part of that Essene group. But as they didn't marry, so that was how they kept on going. But the Therapeutae Essenes, Mary Magdalene, and then the Yeshua, Jesus, he was a Nazarene, a Nazarite, and so these were the heretics of Judaism. One of the things that people have said that they don't believe anyone could survive being crucified. Well, that's again, if we have it on historical record, good old Flavius Josephus, and he was he wrote the history of the Jewish nation as he knew it, and that was. But he was a rabbi. He also, we know about the Essenes from him because he lived with the Essenes for a number of years, but he left them and he eventually became a part of the Pharisees. But what he did was he was a general, Titus, who was in charge of the Romans, who were at war with the Jews at the time, and he realised they couldn't beat Rome. But he surrendered. He was in charge. He was had a siege of his castle for about 10 months, and they gave up and surrendered, and he realised they couldn't beat Rome, and he didn't want Jewish people to die unnecessarily, so he actually went with the Romans and tried to get other people to surrender. But he made a prophecy that Titus, General Titus, the Roman general, he would one day become emperor, and he said no way, but he did. But he remembered Josephus, his prophecy, anyway, he allowed him to settle and retire in Rome. He was a Roman citizen, and he wrote the Jewish Antiquity. So much of what we know about those times is from Josephus, and he talked about once that he saw these people being crucified by the Romans, and there was quite a lot of them being crucified, but 3 of them he recognised as friends. So he said to Titus, he pleaded with him, he was crying, and he just said, look, they're my friends. And he said, Titus immediately had them taken down from the cross. And somewhere here, here we are. I'll read out what it actually says, rather than go on memory. Not just Yeshua, but others have also survived being crucified. This was attested to by Josephus, the Jewish historian, in his book, The Life of Flavius Josephus, page 20. I was sent by Titus Caesar with Cerilius and 1,000 horsemen to a certain village called Phacoa, in order to know whether it was a place fit for camp. I came back. I saw many captives crucified, and remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintances. I was very sorry at this in my mind, and went with tears in my eyes to Titus, and told him of them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down, and to have the greatest care taken of them, in order to their recovery. Yet 2 of them died under the physician's hands, while a 3rd recovered. So we know from that people have recovered from being crucified. And of course, it's also believed by many, or a certain amount, that it was Yeshua, Jesus Christ, he survived his crucifixion. He was taken down, and once he'd recovered his wounds, he rejoined Mary of Magdala, who was already pregnant at the time of the crucifixion. And there the story varies, certainly as far as history, even tradition is concerned. But her first daughter was Sarah, who was born in Egypt and then arrived in Saint Marie with the boat with the rest of them. And there was 2 other children. They seem to agree on Joseph, and there was another child called Jacob. Now, the stories vary here, but as I have it, that it was Joseph who went to England, and he joined the Druids, and became part of them, and eventually married over there, had children, and then it was Jacob, his brother, who travelled to India and Tibet and those areas there, as other people believe that the missing years from 13 till 30, basically 29. The missing years of Yeshua, Jesus, he was in India and he went to Tibet, and the Tibetan monks in different monasteries have manuscripts which they've copied down in the Paolu, which is the sacred language of the Tibetan sacred language, and this was written down and translated by, what was his name, Nicholas Nicetas. He was in 1897 a Russian explorer. So there's been photographs of this manuscript, and he's got the translation written down there, and they talk of him being there, and initially in India, then up to Tibet, and then he returned, and then he returned to his ministry, and then he was crucified. Why that is important is because the Gospels were written years, sometimes 50, 60 years later, after the crucifixion. John was the first, but the accounting of what actually happened by the Buddhists who took it down and the monks copied it down assiduously, and so that was all happened within those first couple of years after the crucifixion. And how that happened was because the traders on the Silk Road and the other number of trading routes that they were, when the traders came to a village or a town where they stayed for the night, what they did was they went up and they wrote down on the notice board the things that had happened in the time since they were there previously. And so this news travelled around the world. So this news about what happened to Christ in Jerusalem up to his crucifixion was all written down and taken down by the Buddhist monks. So this makes it a much more contemporary account than the Gospels. So all these things, bit by bit, piece by piece, these archaeological finds, various things are cropping up. The Dead Sea Scrolls gave us much more information about the Essenes. The Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic Gospels out at Nag Hammadi, the Gospels that they didn't allow into the Bible. All these things are coming out. You know, they say truth will out. Well, it might come out, but it's a pretty slow process. But the thing is, it is happening. And the other thing is that you really can't keep down an idea that has arrived. And the Cathar message of universal and unconditional love for everybody, which is the Essene message. This is the message of Yeshua and Mary of Magdala. This is what they went out. Universal love, the total equality of the sexes. People just, no one was above or below. No slavery. And there was a big thing because slavery was all over the world. But even Paul, St. Paul, when he put out his, he had his accident with the horse, he was thrown from the horse, he had a bump on the head, he was blind for 3 days, he had visions, hallucinations, and instead of persecuting the Nazarenes, next thing he was loving them, and then he started his own religion, basically, and he said he was the one that stated that Yeshua, Jesus Christ, was the Son of God, and the way it went. But he was a Roman, and he stuck to the Roman way of things, and he wasn't in for equality. He was in his writings he just told slaves to be obedient. He told them and wives, submit to your husbands. So he certainly wasn't into Yeshua's message of equality of equality of brotherly love and equality of the sexes. That wasn't Paul. Somewhere I'll just Here's Paul's message. St. Paul's early Christianity did not continue on with Yeshua and Mary of Magdala's message of equality of the sexes and brotherly love, universal love. He not only condoned slavery, but promoted it. According to Colossians 22, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, not only to please them while they are watching, but with sincerity of heart and fear of the Lord. So that was the complete opposite message to that of Yeshua and the Essenes and the Cathars. And one other little one. As well, there is no Cathar equality of wife with husband. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. And that's Ephesians 5:22. But Christianity as we have it today, it's really Paul's bag. It's Paul's message. They took it from him, but it was not Christianity as we have it today. Not in every case, but in certainly 99% of the cases, it follows the Bible, the biblical, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and is certainly not following the Essene message of universal love and equality that Yeshua and Mary of Magdala were trying to promote, and later, again, the Cathars promoted exactly the same message. Thankfully, Cathar is not in a rush, but it's there, it's happening, and as they say, you can't stop an idea that has arrived. But I think the world is really waiting for Christ consciousness, the Cathar message, just plain humanity. Why do we look up or down on another person? Why don't we care and share? Why aren't we more loving? Why do we find it easier to hate? Why do we have to be so divisive? Even if the Cathar message gets out there, as Henri de Nabour's, the Cathar Perfecto, said, Catharism is for the few, not for the multitude. But that few could eventually be many, many millions. Bye for now. Thanks for listening. Talk again.